Hello, welcome to the second feedback video from week two's discussions, this time on questions 3 and 4 of the chapter discussion. The third question was about the impact of events in England on the colonies. The two major political upheavals of this era were the Civil War of 1642 to 49, when the king was defeated by Parliament and actually executed, and England for a while until 1660 was a republic governed by Parliament and later by the dictator Oliver Cromwell rather than by a king. The monarchy was restored in 1660, but in 1688 to 89, a second revolution took place, the so-called Glorious Revolution, which was more or less bloodless compared to the Civil War, in which a king who was seen by Parliament as too powerful and also suspiciously Catholic was removed and replaced by a king who would abide by Parliament's will and maintain a Protestant church. Both these events had their impact on the Americas. The English Civil War had perhaps less of an impact as you might expect given the dramatic nature of it, but it provided the example that rule by a king was not the only way of doing things, and that representative bodies, the sorts which were growing up within the American colonies, could act in the way that the English Parliament had acted. It also had an impact in religion. In Maryland, the 1649 Act of Toleration, which guaranteed freedom of religion, at least to Christians, was in part inspired by the Catholics' fear that they were becoming a minority in their own colony, and the English Parliament's very harsh line against Catholics. Although the English Civil War led to greater toleration for Puritans and other dissenting Protestants, it actually cracked down on Catholics and on Church of England mainstream Protestants who were seen as too close to the king. So Maryland decides to try and preempt any possibility of Catholic persecution coming out of England by passing the Act of Toleration. The Glorious Revolution had perhaps a bigger impact in the American colonies. The restored government, the restored monarchy, had tried to impose royal governors with strong powers on the colonies in the Americas. In New England and New York, following the Glorious Revolution and inspired by it, there were rebellions which kicked out those royal governors, making sure that the American colonies going into the 18th century would have more of a representative government and less power for the royal governors. The fourth question was about why were relations between the English colonists and the Native Americans deteriorating? Well, mainly this is simply because the English colonists were becoming more powerful, less reliant upon alliances with and the kindness of the Native Americans, able to dictate terms more. You don't see a repeat of the Pocahontas incident when, at least at first, Pocahontas represents the Native Confederacy, Powhatan Confederacy, trying to negotiate as equals with the English. Land hunger by the English leads to them trying to basically throw the natives off their land. So you see violent wars in both New England and Virginia, which lead to the removal of native tribes. Related to this is the fact that the English had a slightly different attitude towards the natives than other European powers did. To put it simply, the English were more racist. The French tended to operate more as equals, trading as partners with the native population. The Spanish certainly were not particularly kind to the natives, but they did at least require a native labor force and tended not to remove them and replace them with Spanish settlers. Spanish settlers were usually a small number, a small elite, whereas in the English colonies, the natives were removed and an entire population of settlers from Europe was brought in to replace them.